Rob Bishop of Utah, a member of the House Natural Resources Committee. Rob, it is great to have you along today on America's Forum.
Thank you. It's always good to talk to you.
Now, Rob, let's hear more about this land and this dispute. Can you amplify for us what we may have left out of the highlights here?
Well, the president has yet to actually formally make this announcement, but from what we know, it will be 500,000 acres that will go right down to the border of Mexico. Unlike some of the others that have been made, this one is contentious and is not unified within the delegation. So the congressman representing that area has a proposal for 50,000 acres that are away from the border, preserving what he sees as the prime land needed for preservation. The two senators have a larger one, but in the two senators' bill, they have the 5 miles along the border is used as a buffer zone that will allow the Border Patrol to have free access for patrolling that border. It also takes away a wilderness study area that prohibits the Border Patrol from going in there on any kind of mechanized vehicle to do their job. Unfortunately, the president can't do that in his announcement. He can't change a wilderness study area. So what will happen is in this 500,000-acre monument, wilderness category will go right down to the border. It will stay as a wilderness area. It has to be done that way, which means the Border Patrol does not have total access. Now, the Border Patrol is going to have to say, because they're part of the administration, that everything is wonderful. But the local sheriff down there does not. And he clearly illustrates that this opens up a whole new avenue for greater ability for cartels to do their drug smuggling and their human trafficking in this area.
And Rob, the president is able to do this through something known as the Antiquities Act. Can you explain to our audience that particular provision?
The Antiquities Act was passed a century ago when there were very few environmental laws and not a whole lot of people living in the West at the same time, that said if a president saw something that was in danger of being destroyed, if there were 3 conditions. One, he had to identify a specific feature that had to be protected. Number 2, it had to be in danger of being destroyed. And number 3, it had to be the smallest area. They were talking in Congress at the time of 100 to 300 acres. Then the president could set that aside until Congress could get around to actually doing something permanent. That is the power the president still has, and he can do that today in 48 of the 50 states. He cannot do that in Wyoming or Alaska, which is another weird thing that happened as years have gone by. The president still has the ability of making these lands as monuments without going through any kind of background, public hearing, study, whatever it is, which is why I think it's fair to say the early presidents used this to preserve land. Most recent presidents since the Carter administration have abused this act to make political statements, to try and do things at the spur of the moment and catch people off guard.
And you take a look, Rob, at the fact that the federal government owns 660 million acres in our nation, and that equates to 1 out of every 3 acres. So when you look at it from that perspective, and especially those of us who hail from the West, the sensation is that it's a land grab. And you have, Rob, just what happened in Nevada with Cliven Bundy. And I know that a lot of folks back east don't understand the whole concept of grazing rights and what happens when you apply for permits and the growing stridency of the Bureau of Land Management and the Forest Service. In the wake of what happened in Nevada at the Bundy Ranch, is this another political statement designed to try to get the West back into line from the sights of the Washington bureaucrats?
I don't know if it's that, or if this administration is just trying to curry favor with certain special interest groups. But I do know that those who are living down there, who are ranching in that area, are concerned because having a monument declared changes what can be done with the land. And that goes back to the other situation. People who have grazing rights that are property rights on federal property can have those changed by the federal government at whim, and they have no recourse, even though it affects their bottom line, affects their ability to make a living. No recourse to come back at those type of things. They're basically at the mercy of the whims of some bureaucrat somewhere. That is what a lot of the people who live there in southern New Mexico have a fear will happen with this new designation. It's still public land, but you have now changed the nature of the land to take it to monument status and to take it out of what had been multiple use status. That has people worried. They don't know if it'll happen, but the history has. It has happened in other areas.
And Rob, you mentioned the fact that members of the New Mexico delegation and those senators in New Mexico are members of the president's own party. They're even trying to rein this in somewhat. Now, you say if the president utilizes the Antiquities Act to get this done, it would create some obvious problems. If and when that's done, can the Congress, can the New Mexico delegation advance the legislation they believe it would be friendlier to their constituents, or once the president utilizes this Antiquities Act, is it like a presidential decree that cannot be modified in any way?
Well, J.D., obviously Congress can overturn anything, can pass legislation, but that makes the assumption that Harry Reid and the Senate actually passed anything. So the idea of actually overturning this is a long shot at best, which is why the president can do this stuff with impunity. It's one of the reasons why we were talking, and the House passed legislation this year, to say, okay, if the president's going to use the Antiquities Act, at least, at the minimum, it should go through a NEPA process which requires public input. So these questions and issues on what happens to this wilderness study area, what will happen to the ranchers who live down there and to their grazing allotments, all these issues should be discussed ahead of time as part of the NEPA process. If we really were serious about letting the president make these designations, and these designations were not politically motivated, we would go through a process that allows public input. The fact that we don't insist upon that says something very sad about this administration, and the fact that that bill has passed the House but is also sitting on the desk of the Senate means that anything that Congress does is going to be very difficult and problematic to accomplish.
Rob, as you mentioned this, and we have a couple of minutes left, again, it's important to talk about border security and the challenges that the Border Patrol and other authorities will confront if this monument is put in place with a strategic area there along the border. Now, you've sponsored legislation, you authored legislation to give the Border Patrol access to these national monuments for the purpose of protecting the border. Can you tell us the fate of the legislation that you have authored and supported?
The irony is that the verbiage I have offered to allow the Border Patrol greater flexibility for patrolling and for keeping our borders secure has passed the House and passed the Senate, but in different bills, so it's not law. What the House has passed from the Judiciary Committee is a first bill for border security, and that language is incorporated in that bill, which is ready to go whenever we start down that process. So the language is still very, very clear. If we really want to secure our borders, we don't necessarily need more manpower or more money. We need to give the Border Patrol access, not just one road along the border itself, but access so they can do regular patrolling, they can do monitoring, they can move when they need to with motorized vehicles. And all of that is prohibited now in anything that is designated as wilderness or wilderness study area or some of the conservation areas, which unfortunately take up a bulk of both the Arizona and New Mexico border. Almost 80% of that stretch is federally owned. The majority of that is in wilderness designation, which makes it difficult for the Border Patrol actually to do their job. And that's what retired Border Patrol agents will tell us.
Well, Congressman Rob Bishop, we appreciate your insights on what is transpiring in the West, your explanation of what is afoot in New Mexico, and we appreciate your time very much. We look forward to having you back here on America's Forum quite soon.
Well, thank you, and thank you for airing this issue.
Good to have my friend Rob Bishop with us, weighing in on the latest Western land grab. He offers insights, but he's also offered some legislation that I think is a rational first step when it comes to border security. Hey, when we come back, former NFL great and Heisman Trophy winner Tim Brown on his new book. Stay with us.